All right, and we're live. Hey, Bob.
Hey,
Welcome to
Vasco.
the live stream. I
Thank
was
you for having me.
absolutely,
I've
it's a
been looking
pleasure.
forward to this. Good to see you.
Likewise. So you have a flag there. Do you want to share a little bit your thoughts on what is going on and maybe concerns, worries that you have? All right, and we're
I
live.
don't know if it's,
Hey, Bob.
worries. I try not to worry too
Welcome
Hey,
to
much, but Vasco. I
the
try to
live
support.
stream.
So the reason for the flag, I have, I don't know if you know, but I've had a interest in diversity and inclusion efforts for a number of years, and I've been trying to use my platform um, for whatever it is, whatever that means, but my platform and my privilege to support those activities. And then when the invasion of Ukraine happened, my heart went out, and as I was watching that unfold, um, my heart went out to those folks. So I immediately reached out to there's an Agile in Ukraine group. There's a small group that does webinars and things like that, trying to get funds and to to support people there. And I reached out to them, and I've been trying to support them. Um, the other thing I worry about with Ukraine is, at least here in the U.S., we have news cycles. So in the first 2 weeks or the first month, everyone's cares passionately about it, but then you lose interest over time in the U.S. And I want to make sure I don't lose interest. So when I have a cause that I'm believing in, I'm in it for the long term, not just for the short term.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same. We've had kind of a memorial or like something to remind ourselves to refresh our memory that this is going on here in the house.
Yeah,
So whenever we are in the living room, there is a piece of paper there in one corner that reminds us that this is going on, and that piece is what we want, and we hope all conflicts to be resolved peacefully and constructively, just like we do at work, by the way.
exactly. We hope, and we're working in that direction. So it's just something that touches my heart. Um, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I didn't support, I didn't have as much of a platform, so I didn't support things the way that I do now. But as I've evolved, or as I've gotten more mature, I try to really support certain activities. So,
Absolutely. And good on you. And also for everybody listening, uh, try to make an effort to follow the news to see what is going on. It's not always pleasant, but we owe it to our brothers and sisters in the Ukraine to at least have them in our minds and in our hearts. And
I,
if you
I would
can
agree.
donate, you can donate to the Ukrainian Red Cross or any other charity you trust, because there's also scams online, so be careful. And actually, Bob is doing something like that. Okay, but before we get into that, I think a proper introduction is in order here, Bob. So we are going to have a live stream. It's gonna take us the better part of an hour. And
Okay.
we have with us for this live stream, of course, Bob Galen. Hey, Bob, welcome again.
Hi, Vasco. Thanks for having me. Hello, everyone.
So, Bob is the author of Extraordinarily Badass Agile Coach, a book he just published recently. And he's also the amazing host of the Agile Coaching Clinic that we host every year in the Agile Online Summit, which just ended. So, this is kind of an extension of the Agile Online Summit with Bob. We didn't have a chance to have Bob on the live stream because he was, of course, busy hosting the coaching clinic. So now we have Bob on the live stream, and he's with us today to talk about Agile Coaching, his latest book, and also an event for coaches that he's co-organizing. And of course, mostly to answer your questions. So if you're on the YouTube live stream and you have questions you would like to ask, just join us, ask those questions. I'll make sure that Bob gets those and has the opportunity to share his wisdom and knowledge and experience with you. So,
Please,
Bob,
everyone, please send me questions. I'm challenging everyone. So I really want to I want to help you, and I want to serve you. So anything at all around agile coaching, please just pop it in and we'll explore it.
absolutely. So be sure to do that. Okay, Bob, but let's dive a little bit more into what you do and also why you're here. So, how did you end up writing and talking about agile coaching?
I mean, in general, I ended up writing and coaching about different topics. So for me, as you probably know, Vasco, a few years ago, actually in 2009, I wrote a book on product ownership. So I've written several books. The coaching book is the most recent one of those. I think for me, how did I end up doing it? Actually, the Genesis story, it's sort of sad. How did I get into public speaking? I was a terrible public speaker. So I'm an introvert. So at the time, I got into public speaking maybe 20, 25 years ago. At the time, I realized I was a deep introvert, and I was also leading development teams, and you really need to be able to think on your feet and do public speaking in a leadership role. And I noticed that was a weakness of mine. And then writing was also, so I had a lot of weaknesses at the time. So writing was a weakness of mine as well. And I really couldn't write well from a business writing prose point of view, but from a general point of view. So my mode of operation is if I have something like that, I'll challenge myself. So I dove into public speaking, and it was ugly at the beginning. And then I dove into writing. And my first book was something not agile. It was something called Software End Games. And I remember when I got the edited version back, I screamed. I had a high pitch. My wife thought I was upstairs in my office, and my wife thought that I was having a heart attack or something, and because I had this high pitched scream because everything was red. I thought I was done, and literally like every word, every letter was almost touched with red. I still have that version now to keep me humble. But that's why I started it. Is it's a challenge to myself. Now the thing along the way, the other driving force for me is to try to help people to share my experience, right? So if I see at the time when I wrote the product owner book, I saw a lot of product owners who were struggling with what is that and how to do it well. And I wanted to try to offer something. And I think it's the same genesis for the coaching book. I to this day I see a lot of people who struggle with agile coaching. What is it? What isn't it? And how do I become excellent in that? How do I become a badass, if you will? And I wanted to try to offer something to the community.
And we'll dive more into the Agile Coaching book in a second, but I'm now sharing on screen the myriad books that Bob has published. I don't recall, I mean, on your Amazon page, there are 11 different books that list you as the author. One of them is a collection of different essays. So you've been busy writing.
It goes back to that genesis though, Vasco. And I've gotten better. Like to this day, I don't think of myself, and this isn't humility. I think I'm an average writer. It's something that I keep plugging away at. I've gotten better, and I'm good. I'm okay at it, but it's something that I keep sort of plugging away at. I think my public speaking has gotten better, probably gotten better than my writing skills. I'm still not great at both, but it's probably accelerated more than my writing. It's just something I have to work at.
Yeah.
And you can clearly see that I'm relentless when it comes to trying to improve.
I think that's a great example of how we get better at things. And I'm sure we will talk about it when we talk about getting better at agile coaching. But like practice, experience is how we get better at things. I remember one of the it was the learning journey for my son, the oldest son, and he was like 5, and he wanted to draw, right? Like, so he really tried, and we bought him a book that had like all of these basic techniques for children to learn how to draw Disney characters like Donald Duck, Mickey Mouse, and so on. And he was trying, but he couldn't get the perfection he wanted.
Right.
So at that time, I mean, he was 5, obviously. At that time, he reacted in a frustrated manner, and he really lashed out and threw the book against the wall. And I saw that. I didn't scream at him or anything because I've been there. I've been the one
Yep.
doing that when I was a kid. So I told him, look, it's okay because in order to be good at anything, we first have to accept and be okay with being bad at it, right? And I think that's the example that you just illustrated for us here. I mean, you call yourself a bad writer or an average writer, but you keep at it. And of course, every book is slightly better than the previous one, if not a lot better than the previous one, right?
Absolutely. The other thing I learned, and we're talking about this, is the art of putting a good team together. So an editor. So some of my books are the coaching book was self-published. So I have an editor that I've worked with, and she is just wonderful to collaborate. So it's not just about me writing better, but it's also forming a team around you, uh, and having them help you. Um, Someone did the sketch notes in the book, and contributing that, which actually helped me focus my writing. I'm a visual person, so having a visual representation to focus on what is this chapter about really helps me to sort of align my thoughts. So some people, I think, at least being open to others' ideas, uh, and and being open to having people help you and guide you along that way. So my books are better because of Deanna is her name, and she and I have a wonderful working relationship. If I was to write another book, which I don't know if I will, uh, but I would collaborate with her.
Yeah, never say never. Actually, that's a great point. Like as agile coaches and scrum masters, we very often work with teams that are, in some cases, kind of put together like haphazardly, right? Like just
Right.
people were there, right? So we need to do
Right.
something. We just brought them together. And it strikes me that one of the major worries for us as scrum masters and agile coaches is to help these teams coalesce, like become proper teams, right? And you were talking about how you do it in your own work, like, as a writer in this case, but I'm pretty sure you pay attention to also those aspects when you work with teams. Like, what are some of the key lessons you've learned about helping a group of individuals coalesce and become a great team while you are doing your agile coaching work?
I think one of the most important things is not to realizing, and you know this, realizing that you can't change the team. So as a coach, we can't change people. You can't change. So I can't walk into a team and take a disparate set of individuals and form them into a team. I mean, I can play some influence and things like that. But one of the systems coaching, what I learned in some systems coaching classes that I took, is you reveal the system to itself. So as a coach, you show the team what's happening, and it's their job to coalesce. It's their job. Now you can show them what's happening, you can show them the impact it has to outcomes, you can show them the impact it has to a lack of inclusivity or whatever, and you can show them, you can model as a coach what good looks like. But really, to me, it's the reveal. If I was to share something with people, reveal the system, reveal the team to itself, and it's their job to change themselves and to be patient and to create the space for them to do that. I think I see so many coaches that want to change teams. They march in and they make it about the coach, and they make it about my outcome. And they're not bad coaches and they're not bad people, but they're not honoring or respecting the team, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talk about the system, now you were specifically referring to the team. And as agile coaches, we need to also understand like the system is kind of a fluid concept, right? Like if you're talking about the team itself, then obviously the system is the team. But sometimes the system is also the relationship between the team and the stakeholders, right? So how do you um, deliberately work on kind of defining, okay, so which system am I working with at the moment? Because it's very easy to get lost, like trying to do too many things at the same time.
I think you plan. One of the things in the book that I talk about is being specific about who is your client. So when you're coaching, I use a client. Is it the team? It could be an individual. It could be a group of leaders. It could be multiple teams or whatever. So who is your client? What is their agenda? How am I going to show up and respect them? And so what is my goal or target in serving the team? And the system is part of that. So you're right. in the context I was talking about, the system is the team. The other thing is to realize that it's the entire team. So it could be the managers of the team. It could it's Scrum Master and product owner. The other thing is you are part of the system. So as a coach, I am recognizing that I have influence on the system. So how am I a part of it? And then if I'm coaching in another, okay, so now I'm coaching the team and I'm coaching through some impediments, Vasco. Like there's some organizational, there's some cultural impediments that are sort of inhibiting the team. Well, then I can change my system lens to be okay. There's a cultural aspect, or it might be a specific leader, and I would include them. I just think of it as agenda. Think of it as my coaching goals. What am I trying to do? So try not to do everything. Try not to be scattershot with your coaching, but be very intentional, and then change your lens, if that makes sense. Change your lens of the focus of what system am I coaching, and only do one at a time. I mean there's multiple systems, but really be centered. Really be centered on what the goal is. But again, that reveal the system to itself is sort of a primary mantra, I think, to me. So if, for example, if there's a cultural dynamic that's impeding the team, leaders are coming in and swooping and changing priorities on the team, then reveal that dynamic. The team is aware of it, the leaders are aware of it, but they may not be aware of what is the impact to the entire system. What happens as a result of that behavior, and just show that.
And because they are not aware, actually, when we come in as coaches and say, hey, this is happening, they will take it as, wait a minute, I don't see that happening. Right. So one of the things that was very hard for me, and I had to learn this the hard way by being the one being coached myself. One of the things that was very hard for me, it still is, but of course, at least now I know it's there, is to be patient enough to allow the team to figure out what is actually going on. And it might sometimes even be different from what you observe. Like, for example, you just gave an example of the external stakeholder, like, a C-level person or a manager of the team coming in every now and then and kind of interrupting the team. Now, the team might feel that that is a very natural pattern. Like, it's always been like that, right? We've all heard that, right? And one of the things that I have had a very hard time, and it took me a bit of therapy and coaching myself to actually start to accept that, is actually it's okay if the team isn't ready to tackle that. They will not see what is happening. And it is then incumbent upon us to find other things that the team is ready to take on.
It, I think one of the things related to what we're talking about is dropping, and I talk about this in the book a little bit, before every coaching engagement, try to drop your biases or your assumptions. I I, I think our experience is a good thing and a bad thing. As we gain rich experience, it's wonderful. You and I have seen, for example, we've seen that external stakeholders interrupting the team. We've probably seen that 1,000 times or more in our coaching journeys, and then we can equate that to be that's a bad thing. So now we're applying our bias, our history, our experience, and our judgment. That's a bad thing. You don't want to do that, because one, the team may not be ready to attack it, and two, you know what, in the context of this system, it may be okay. It's not my job as a coach to judge good or bad. It's revealed the system to itself, and it's the system's job to figure that out. Now, again, I'm not saying erase our experience, but this may be that one out of 1,000 instances, Vasco, where it's okay. It's not doing harm. If you right, and I don't want to come in and prejudge that as a coach. So really try to. There's a notion of cleaning myself up before every coaching conversation. I try to clean my brain up a little bit. I have a little prep pattern that I go through of filling up. I close my eyes and I fill up my bags with my biases or my judgments or something like that. And then I drop my bags, and then I open my eyes, whether I'm in person or virtually. And then I try to enter. There's a notion of maybe being present as a coach. I'm trying to be present in the moment and not judge everything.
Yeah, and being present has a very clear and crisp definition, which is to actually listen to what is going on and ask questions that help people evaluate on their own
Yes.
terms what is going on, right? Being
Yes.
present is
Ex-
not finding the next best question to ask to drive them in a
No,
particular direction, right?
no, exactly. One
So,
metaphor I'll offer real quickly is this notion of dancing with your clients. I just video recorded something with a friend of mine in the UK, and it was a little visual, and it was the notion of dancing with your client and having different stances with your client. So what I'm saying is we're not coaching, we're sensing and responding. If anyone's familiar with Kinevin, I think of Kinevin thinking in coaching. We sense the client, we sense the environment, we're present, and then we respond appropriately. And that may mean we then respond with another question. Uh, but it's related to what we're sensing with the client. Or we might respond with a joke or whatever, or we might respond with a story. We might actually go from coaching stance to another stance. We might go to a mentoring stance, if that makes sense to everyone, or a teaching stance as opposed to a coaching stance. So I think in terms of effectively coaching is there's not just one style, but you're dancing with your client in service to your client, in service to their agenda.
you just used the term that I wanted to explore a little bit more. You used it also a minute ago, which is this idea that it's the client's agenda, right? Can you expand a little bit more on that, what it means and why it's so important for coaches?
So I think in terms of one of the dangers in a lot of environments is coaches, scrum masters, or coaches are told to coach people. So the organizational stakeholders are saying, you've probably taken jobs, and it's like, Vasco, I want you to coach Bob Galen, right? And go
Coach
and
them to
go
be more productive.
coach him to be more productive. And so that's your charter. And but it's not my charter. It's not my so I'm your client. In this case, you're my coach and client, whatever those terms mean. But everyone, but Vasco, the mindset should be Vasco is serving me. So he's bringing his agenda. And and it's a fair agenda, it's from stakeholders, they're paying the bills, etc. But I think one of my recommendations is to flip that and to co-create that agenda with the client. So what I'm getting at is, what does Bob want? One of the first questions, that Vasco should be asking me, what are my problems? What is keeping me up at night? What do I see as my strengths or weaknesses? How could he serve me? Now, we can maybe narrow into the agenda is close to what that agenda he was given, or it may be something else. But the more that he understands, it's the client's agenda, that would be much more powerful coaching. It's going to be stickier. It's going to be relevant. I'm going to resonate it. If he comes in and says, Bob, I've been told to make you more productive. So that's my goal. I mean, I might smile at him. I might shake his hand. I might tell him he's a really handsome gentleman. But in my brain, I'm not aligned with that agenda, right? No one has, it's very disrespectful to come in and to be coached. It's right. And I'm not going to align with it very well.
So
And the outcomes are not going to be good. Go ahead.
I wanted to explore that word a little bit more because I think there's a lot of knowledge and experience that you just packed into that it's disrespectful comment. And I totally agree with that. And I agree with that also because I've been the one being coached and I felt disrespected when suddenly the coach wanted me to pay attention to something that I didn't care about. I was worried about other things, right? So tell us a little bit more from you now, the author for coaches, right? The person who wrote the book about coaching. What do you mean when you say it's disrespectful when we bring our agenda into the coaching that we have with teams and individuals?
Well, that's not trigger. That's not trigger on disrespect or respect. I mean, those are words, but let's talk about the basics of coaching. It's like the basics of football, right? There's basics. These are rules or they're guidelines that are really sound. And one of the basics, the International Coaching Federation, the ICF, has some very sound guidelines for coaching. Not just what is agile coaching, what is family coaching, what is individual coaching, what is coaching. One of their guidelines is, you hear me, and Vasco, you hear me saying it, is the agenda. We serve the client's agenda. Well, what does that mean? They tell us where to coach them. We don't, right? They tell us where they need help or assistance, where we can serve them. And if they say, you know what, I don't need it, then we take that no for an answer, and we might walk away and say, you know what, they're not ready for coaching for us, right? And I'll try it later. So we respect the client, is one thing. Meet the client. Another ICF mindset is meet the client where they are, not where you want them to be. And this dovetails with what I just said. Don't meet them. I want Bob to be highly productive,
I want you
right?
to adopt SAFe.
I want to adopt safe. I want you to adopt. No, where is Bob? Another thing I think from a coaching, and when I say ICF principles, it's more of a coaching mindset. So some of the things I'm sharing now are what is the mindset that a good coach brings to the table. So you bring respect of the client. So it's not the disrespect. I want to respect you. So I respect your agenda. Empathy is something that's really important. Get to know, look at the world through the client's eyes before you start changing, trying to change their vision. So, what are their challenges? For example, if I'm trying to bring them safe, uh, build empathy on trying to understand scalability challenges from their point of view. Don't bring them a methodology or a
Actually,
framework.
one way to put that would be if SAFe is the end state, like the adoption of SAFe or Scrum or extreme programming, whatever that is, if that's the end state, then our job as coaches would be to endeavor to surface a problem that is in that direction, but the problem needs to come from the team, right? Like, for
Correct.
example, if we're talking about SAFe specifically, it might be that the team is having trouble coordinating dependencies. All right. So how does that show up in your, day-to-day
Yep.
work and
Yep.
your regular deliveries? Let's explore that and let's figure out, are there tools we could use that would help us that there, right? Oh, look, there's this idea of having a board with what you're planning to work on and then kind of physically link the items or visually link the items so that we know always what dependencies are coming. Would this be worth trying?
Absolutely. As you were talking, Vasco, I was thinking a word popped into my mind around this mindset: resistance. So very often I hear agile coaches use the word they're resisting agile or they're resisting safe or and resisting has that word has negative connotations, meaning they're an impediment. I'm bringing an idea that's wonderful, but no one is aligning with that idea. And one of the things that I like to do for myself is reframe resistance. It's just information. Like people, oh, they resist change. Well, don't think that way. That's actually having a negative. If you're talking about your coaching emotional field and the relationship you have with your coachee, well, then that's bringing judgment to bear. So no, they're not resisting you. They're not resisting change. Change is hard. Try to understand it more. Uh, Try to get data from them rather than stereotyping, not even verbally or even in our head. Oh, they're a change resistor. I have to overcome them. Think about that language. What is that? Or I'm right, you're wrong. I need to push you over that hurdle to get to right with me. Think about what that is, the implications of that relationship.
Yeah, in the
And if
context
I'm
of
pushing,
respect we were just discussing, right?
exactly. So meet them where they are. Don't stereotype. Don't have terms like resistance. It's just data. And help them meet them where they are and help them to navigate through the change in service to them, to figure out how safe can best serve them, or and be open-minded as a coach. Maybe safe is not the answer. Maybe it's something else that you can offer them and
And
they can
they
help
may
them to
have the answer already.
exactly.
So we're gonna. I actually sent out a poll just before this session started, and I asked people. The poll prompt was: you're a Scrum Master or an Agile coach working with one or more teams, and you're faced with impossible odds and some strong resistance. Do you A, soldier on, B, convince people, C, find other options, or D, hold a retrospective? And we'll come back to that poll in a second. I also want to hear Bob's opinion on it, and then we'll see the results on Twitter and LinkedIn. People have been answering that. But before that, I did want to share with everybody. There's this event that Bob is hosting for you if you're an Agile coach or a Scrum Master. And actually, Bob can share a little bit more about it with us. It's called the 2022 Badass Agile Coaching Day, which is happening on December 7th on Wednesday. And one thing I love, by the way, is that it's on 3 different time zones. So, Bob, tell us a little bit more about that event, what you're trying to achieve with that.
Sure. I mean, it really has two primary goals. One, it's just an idea. Again, it goes back to me trying to leverage my platform. We were talking about that earlier, Vasco, and what can I do to get better? So I'm leveraging my platform, um, and it's Agile Coaching. So I'd like to make the world of Agile Coaching better and offer other folks views of that. So we have 9 wonderful speakers, Agile coaches, and they're working in a series of triplets. So 3 speakers in one time zone, then 3 in another, and then 3 in another. It'll be recorded, and there'll be some materials that all the attendees will get. So that's one, wonderful different points of view about Agile coaching. And what's nice for me is I'm just the moderator. So I'm not talking. So you won't have to listen. So maybe this is an attraction for everyone. You won't have to listen to me. You'll listen to some wonderful coaches. The second thing is the part of my idea was I'd like to generate revenue to give to 2 causes that I care a lot about. One is African Agility, which is a cause. Anu Gopal is a coach. She's a member of the Scrum Alliance board. A few years ago, she created a group in Nigeria, and their goal is to train in technology young women there to give them a leg up to advance themselves in their lives. And it's really hard in Nigeria to get equipment, to get training. And she's been spearheading this. And I think she's run literally a few thousands of girls through this program. And it just warmed my heart when I heard her. I know her, and I've been supporting it ever since. So half of the proceeds from the event go there, and half of the proceeds go to Agile in Ukraine, which is a group in the Ukraine, some Agilists, and who I trust, who give all funds to causes in the Ukraine. And I wanted to support them. They have a website, and you can see links to these 2 groups on the page that Vasco is going to share. But I wanted to support those 2 causes, and so far, we have over 100 people signed up, and we've raised over $4,000 US that I'm just going to split. And it's all proceeds, all revenue goes to those 2 causes, and it's a privilege for me to support them. I wanted to do something, Vasco, and if this idea keeps, I may do this again. So you're actually one of my role models, or you've inspired me with the work that you do. So if this is successful, I may do this periodically and give to other causes. And I would love to create that kind of a giving train going forward.
Absolutely. It's like a get a lot of information, knowledge, and experience, but also give to those in need.
Yeah.
Africa Agility and Agile Ukraine. And I'm looking at the program here. I'm sharing on screen the program. And it starts with, as you said, there's like 3 sessions. It starts with the European, Middle East, and Asia session, which is starts at 8 a.m. Eastern. So that would be I think 4 p.m. or something like that, 3 p.m. actually in Central European time. And you have Brandon Rains, Dana Pilayeva, and Peter Fischbach doing that session. Then there's the Americas session from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern with Jen Fields, Joel Bancroft Connors, and Sean Bradshaw. And finally, something that I am sure our Australian friends will love, since they usually don't get a lot of the content we produce, the APAC session, which is 9 p.m. to midnight Eastern with Dimple Shah, Sandy Mamoli, and Michael Wynn. That's quite a lot of coaches and quite some great speakers you've got there.
I think so. The other thing I did is I cherry picked. So I picked them, and and this is part of my experiment. So I don't know if it's a good thing. So I volunteered them, and I invited them, but I also said I would love you to talk about this. So for example, Michael in Australia, I know that he does a lot of government work. Australian government work. So I twisted his arm and said, can you talk about coaching in large scale governments and some of your stories and experiences there? Dana Paileva is what I respect her facilitation skills. She's got wonderful facilitation chops, does classes and things like that. So I asked her to talk about facilitation. So I I I individually picked the folks and their topics, and all of them I think graciously agreed to my topics. That they're broad topics, so it's a real. I think it's a nice mix of different topics, different coverage from area experts, all under the banner of Agile Coaching.
And I hear that your goal is to get to $5,000, 2,500 per each of the charity organizations or associations that you're supporting. How is that goal going?
So I'm about at 4,500, so I'm close to that goal right now. But like anything with a goal, more is better. So so uh I'm greedy because I want to do whatever I can for these folks. So everyone just sign up, pass the word. I really think they're worthwhile causes, and it's just a great way to get learning. And like I said, you don't have to attend. You're going to get recorded sessions, all nine. So if you register, you'll get actually a free copy, an e-copy of my book. So you'll get some resources, you'll get some video, and so
Yeah,
join
it's a
us.
lot. It's a lot of value for the money you're asking for the ticket, which is
That's what I
$25
that's what
US.
I that's what I thought. So join me in my efforts to really help some worthwhile causes.
Absolutely. So everybody go to the website. It's on the chat, so you can just click it and go there
Hey
directly
Vasco,
and register.
and thank you for this platform. I really appreciate you giving me the platform to talk about that. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And by the way, we're not just talking about the event, we're also talking about coaching. And actually, now comes the quiz. So the question is, dear Bob Galen, you're on the spot now.
Okay.
You're a Scrum Master or Agile coach working with one or more teams. At the moment, you're faced with impossible odds and some strong resistance. What do you do? Soldier on, convince people, find other options, or hold a retrospective? Let's see what Bob would answer to this poll.
So I think it depends. You knew I was going to say that. So soldier on, I don't think is a for me is a very good. So that would be just continue to plug away, continue to try to. I call it pushing soap up a rope. Continue to try to push soap up a rope. Uh, you can do that. I don't know. You're not doing your job, so that doesn't resonate with me. The second one, Vasco, was what? What was the second
The
option?
second one was, do you convince people?
So no, that doesn't resonate with me either, because I can't change everyone. I'm going to go on record. We can't. So I've been doing this for 20 plus years, coaching. I have not, and you may think much less of me, but not one time in over 20 years have I converted someone to be agile. Not one person. I reached in, I walked into a scrum team, and I hit the little switch, and everyone was a high performing agile team member. You, I've never done. You cannot change people. It was something. Now I've tried to change people. I've tried to convince people.
That's how you know it's
Uh,
not possible, right?
yeah, I've tried and tried and tried, but it doesn't. So the point is, people have to change themselves. So I don't, and they have now. We can set the environment for them to change themselves. We can be an inspiration. We can be a role model. I can be an energizer. We can be patient. We can be nurturing. We can be a coach. All of the things we're talking about, and that can influence the change, but it's up to them. So that second option I'm leaning away from. What was the third one?
So
Walk away or
the third and fourth were, the third was find other options, and the fourth was hold a retrospective.
I'm leaning into holding a retro, uh, and maybe a retro not on. maybe a retro on resistance. And remember, I was couching resistance earlier, so perhaps not a general retro. Sometimes I use the term a retro on the retro. So a lot of Scrum Masters they'll say that the retros are not driving results or not driving continuous learning and change, and they're getting frustrated, and they try to introduce all of these games and things, but it's really not getting the outcomes that they want. And it's like, well, why don't you just do a retro on your retro and see what that surfaces and reveal the system to itself. So using that logic, I might do a retro on the resistance and try to hear from the team and really listen as a Scrum Master coach, like really listen to what they're saying and what they're not saying, because there may be safety issues, there may be cultural issues, there may be other inhibitors that aren't even coming out. But I'm leaning into the retro and a retro on resistance and why is change so hard, and lay some of those topics on the table, and then see what surfaces from the team. Do a retro, and I would make it more discussion. So I wouldn't bring 100 post-it or all of the. I wouldn't bring 1,000 games to try to surface that. I would try to really create high engagement and collaboration and discussion at the team and see what we could surface. Uh, now
Well,
I'm
why
going to.
why not why not the third option, which is find other options?
So we could find other. So I read that find other teams to work with. So I don't know what find other
That could
options
be an
mean.
option, right? Like that could be an
Yeah,
option.
yeah. Now I was going to resonate with that. I was going to lean into number three, Vasco. The team may not be ready. So you may want to give the team space and say, here, uh, I'm not gonna keep pushing so hard. I once did coaching at a company, Vasco. They paid for me to come in and give coaching hours, and they paid a lot of money, and they gave me an office, and they're like, we have this Bob Galen in, and come
The
come
Bob
come
Galen
on
in.
and come on over and get coaching. And the first day, the sponsor stopped by my office after the first day, and he's like, Bob, how did it go? And I'm like, it went great. I read a book, and I was writing some blog posts, and I made a few phone calls, and I was very busy. And he's like, did you do any coaching? And I'm like, no, no one came by. And I was perfectly comfortable with that. That wasn't my goal,
I bet he
but
looked surprised.
right, but and I didn't run around and force people to be coached. Does everyone understand what I'm saying? I sat there and I was waiting for them to, and I was perfectly willing to wait for folks to show curiosity and interest. I'm not trying to be lazy. I know I have a job to do, but instead of me subjecting the world to coaching, I make myself available, and it's like, instead of me pushing, allow them to pull me into the organization. So the third option to me might be give the team a little space and say, here, I'm here for you when you're more interested in Agile, but give them a little space to stop pushing, which would then reduce the resistance because you're not pushing against the resistance. So
Uh,
that's how I was leaning into option three.
So I'm gonna share the results with you. People on YouTube
Cool.
are actually looking at the results already. I just posted the polls on the chat as well if you want to participate. So on Twitter, let's see if there's a big difference on Twitter and on LinkedIn. These days, it's all the rage to talk about the difference between Twitter and all others. Okay, so on Twitter, about 7% said soldier on. About 10% said convince people. And then about the same, like there's a difference of maybe 1 or 2 votes, said find other options or hold a retrospective. And those were the two most voted options. This pretty much goes with what you said. Now, on LinkedIn, it's almost the same, slightly different, because the numbers are basically the same as on Twitter. So 8% for soldier on, 8% for convince people. But the find other options has a slight edge. So at least on LinkedIn, people are leaning into finding other options. When I asked
I
that,
do. I
sorry, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. No, I was just going to say though, I want to anchor on, it's not it's the team's job to overcome the resistance. And we've talked about that thread throughout. So independent of the options, look for places where you're serving the team, and not telling them or not trying to overcome the resistance, etc. I just don't think that's a good strategy as a coach, as we've sort of beaten that thread to death. Now a lot of coaches are uncomfortable with that, Vasco. Remember my silly story at that client was, a lot of coaches look at me like I'm weird. It's like, you're being paid, you are supposed to be coaching, get out there and coach. So a lot of people are uncomfortable with idleness as a coach, if that makes sense, right? It like being pulled. And the reason I share that story is all of those options, don't be prescriptive. Come up with some creative options. Maybe you could share some videos. Maybe you could share some stories. Maybe you could invite the team to another team. All of these ideas are not, they're more invitational based than prescription based. Or think of it as more pull than push, because I think push is an ineffective strategy as a coach.
In fact, I wanted to take that further. There's a comment on the LinkedIn poll by Michael Kusters, and he said, um, as a coach, I don't want to achieve anything for myself. I support people in achieving what they want. If what they want, so that was never defined, how would I know if I'm successful? And how would they know if they're successful? And this is actually bringing me to one incredibly critical conversation that I very rarely see in organizations in general, which is, what does it mean to be successful, right? And as a coach, I want to start by having that conversation with my client or clients, right? Like, I want them to define success for themselves, right? This could be in the
Right.
form of a question, something that they want to find the answer for. This could be in the form of a challenge, something they want to achieve or sort out. This could be in the form of some metric that relates to something that is very important for them. But having them define success allows me to then be mindful of that and bring in prompts, questions, thoughts, experiments that they may want to consider in that direction.
Remember we were talking about agenda setting earlier on, and establishing the client, establishing their agenda. A part of that, we didn't mention the word, but it's the outcomes or the objectives that they have. So it's not just their agenda. How would they measure that? What would good look like? What would success look like? And to me, that's a part of that discussion, which should occur before you start coaching, right? It's like a precursor of coaching. Now you can do that with your stakeholders or your sponsors, and or you can do that with the team. Now let's be fair, there can be direct conflict there. In the real world, I'm just gonna in the real world, there can be a misalignment between what the objectives of your sponsors are, who's paying the bills, and what the teams are. And part of what we're talking about, we're having some pure coaching discussions, but I think there's some, I don't know, real world dynamics. There's You may have to be a little bit more prescriptive, or you may have to balance between those objectives as a coach.
Or you may have to do something like, hey, have you asked this other team if that would work out for them? Because
Correct.
what you're doing will
Correct.
affect them. Have you considered
Correct.
what the effect will be on them? Right? Like, I
Correct.
think that a little bit serving like I know that you sometimes have a lighthouse in the background of your Zoom calls. Now you have the Ukraine flag, but I've seen you with the lighthouse, and I think that that's a great metaphor for what we need to do sometimes as Scrum Masters and Agile coaches, which is, hey, look, you're about to be beached if you continue in this direction. You can still continue in this direction, but if
Correct.
you do, there will be consequences.
Absolutely. And to me, what you just did, using stances as a metaphor or dancing, is you went there from coaching stance, asking questions, and holding the agenda. To me, you went to advising or leading stance, where you strongly told danger. There's danger in, yes, you can do this, but there's an alignment issue, and I would strongly encourage you to adopt safe, if that's the direction, because there's implications if we don't. and then come back to, now how do we do that? How do you envision that? And then maybe switch back to coaching stance. But sometimes in service to our client, like if the clients are discarded from the company, we're not serving them, right? If they're not aligned with the organization. So there's finesse to it. I love what you said, Bosco. There's a bit of finesse, and there's a bit of courage on that other side, like stepping out of that coaching mindset a little bit, stepping out into the danger zone, but then stepping back.
All right. So I have two questions that I wanted to cover before we end, and we're getting close to the end here. So in the book, you
Okay.
use the Agile Coaching Wheel as the model on which you build the book and the messages that you have in the book. So give us an introduction of that. I will share the Agile Coaching Wheel on the screen so that people can have a visual representation. But could you
Okay.
walk us through that?
So in 2010, Lisa Adkins and Michael Spade created something or co-created something called the Agile Coaching Competency Framework. And it's some people call it an X-Wing model, and it had four primary competencies in it. And it was teaching, mentoring, facilitation, and coaching. And coaching in this case, to me, is typified by asking questions, good, open-ended, powerful questions. So it's an agile coach as a facilitator, or an agile coach as a mentor, or agile coach as a teacher, or as a coach. A question, helping the client to discover their own way. Now, thinking about dancing, then we were dancing across those four, depending on what the client needed from us. We would show up with those stances or those competencies. The Agile Coaching Growth Wheel used that, honored that historically, but around 2016, some open spaces and things started looking at what's missing from the X-Wing model. And there were two competencies that were added. One is consulting, or what I would call advising, like providing advice. And I think of Vasco as just, modeling that to some degree of, I'm going to give you advice. You can do what you want, but we better adopt safe. I'm coming out strongly in this direction, and this is why. And then coming back. A lot of coaches, X-Wing coaches, wouldn't go there. It's one of the reasons why I like the wheel. It's one of the reasons I talk about I want a more well-rounded approach. A lot of coaches would only ask questions, and they might not have the courage or the wherewithal or give themselves the permission to change stances to that view. The other thing it added is a leadership stance. Think of leading as walking your talk. Think of leading as you are a role model, whether you open your mouth. So, as a coach or a scrum master, you are coaching when you don't say a word, because people are watching how you show up. How are you living the scrum values, if that makes sense to everyone, right? What are you doing? Are you living them when it's easy, and are you living them when it's tough? And to me, that's that leading by example. And sometimes as a coach, you need to lead from the front, maybe as an evangelist. Not very often, but sometimes. So the wheel added some stances. It combined teaching and mentoring into guided learning. And then the other thing is it basically kept the X-Wing model, the premises of that. Now, the other thing that it added was, it adds Dreyfus levels for skill in each competency. So it provides advice, which I think is incredibly valuable. It provides advice or dynamics of what does good look like for an entry level coach facilitator. Then what does mid-level experience look like, and what does advanced experience look like? So it's not a grading system. It's not intended for compensation or evaluation, but for self-growth. Like, how do you grow yourself as a coach? The third thing it did, and it called out, which I think is incredibly powerful, is in the middle of the wheel, and this is why I love the metaphor, is self-mastery. It's the idea that to be a coach, don't think of coaching others, think of what are you doing to coach yourself? Are you becoming self-aware? So Scrum Masters, right? Oh, I want to be a coach. Well, okay, the first step is you can look at facilitation, but what are you doing to grow yourself from the inside out? Are you walking your talk? Are you leading? How are you role modeling? Are you are you a continuous learner? And you should be, etc. So that's self-mastery. How self-aware are you? Do you have humility? Do you have that servant mindset that we're talking about? If you don't, you need to work on that. If it's about you, I'm a scrum master, but I want to be a coach in 2 weeks because that's the hierarchy that I need to get that job. Okay, Well, but are you working on the inside out to get that? Not just aspiring to an org chart change. So those are some of the changes. And and the wheel is this well-rounded. You want to be a coach. There's a lot of nuance. It's deep and it's broad. And the wheel gives you a framework to grow yourself,
I
to
like that
evaluate yourself
self
and to grow yourself.
mastery is there at the center, because my own experience is that if we don't understand ourselves, like for example, when we change stances, right? Like we need to be made aware of that. Somebody needs to coach us to get through the process of understanding, oh, I'm changing stances, right? And if we don't have that, then we are not yet ready to be coaches. This is one of the reasons why I tell everybody that if you want to be an agile coach or a scrum master that is successful and impactful, first you need to get help for yourself and learn yourself what it is to be coached, right? To be
Well,
the client in that relationship.
I and I'll even extend it. Yes, and Vasco, and to be coachable. I was coaching someone the other day, an agile coach, and I realized that they were, to be honest, they were a little full of themselves and they wanted to be coached, but they really weren't coachable. Like, I know that, I know that, I know that. Okay, well, if you know everything, then that's great. Go off on your journey. What I'm saying is that that was not the level of coachability that you want. And again, that goes back to self-mastery. Like saying you want something, I want to be a better coach, but are you? Are you coachable, and are you coaching others? Are you mentoring others, and are you a mentee, etc.?
So we're getting close to the end here, but I didn't want to go before I shared your book with everybody. So let me put that on screen. And the link is on the chat as well, so people can go and check it out on Amazon or wherever else you get your books. It's also available as an audio book, by the way, which was a surprise for me. Uh, Bob, your book is definitely a resource that people should get their hands on. And of course, they should attend the live event as well. The link is also on the chat for people that want to attend that live event on coaching. But what's one resource you can share with our audience that will both motivate them and maybe even help them find like minded people to chat, to interact with, and to grow as a coach?
I mean, there's a few, but one that comes to mind is comparative agility. If you've all heard of it, comparative agility is a site that has a bunch of surveys or a bunch of assessments. Um, and Mark Summers is a co-author of the book, and we contributed a comparative agility. They call it a personal improvement or a PI survey for Agile coaching. So if you go to comparative agility, they have an assessment, and the Scrum Alliance has one on their website as well. But the comparative agility is slightly better, I think. And I'm biased, but you can go there, and you can do a self-assessment based on the wheel. And I would suggest everyone do this. Scrum. I don't care what your title is or what your role is. You could be a Scrum Master right out of class. Just go do the assessment and get a baseline of this is where I am from the wheel and the competencies. The other cool thing about and it's free, by the way. It's free and the data is yours. It's not shared data. Uh, and then they have a dashboard where you can put together a continuous learning roadmap for yourself based on your results. You could plan for what am I going to learn next? How am I going to grow myself? And Mark and I spent a lot of time. We spent more time providing resources for learning than we did on the survey itself. It was actually funny. We've probably spent twice as much time on finding a rich set of videos and books and articles and podcasts and things like that, where we could recommend this is a place to go to grow your coaching. And the coaching is along the competencies. So you can, if you want to grow your facilitation, there's advice. If you want to grow your coaching, there's advice. If you want to grow your self mastery, there's advice for that. And you can assess where am I at on Dreyfus and then to grow that. I think that would be a great, our vision for that, it wasn't to get money because it's free. It was to provide a resource for coaches to grow themselves. And I think that's a great place to do that. The other thing I would say, Vasco, independent of that, is if you want to be a good coach, find opportunities to practice. the more you can practice so coaching, forget learning, forget books and workshops. That's all great, but coaching is an activity that if you that you have to do it in a safe environment. You have to practice. There's something called dojos where you can find a group. There's groups. There might be a group in your local area, a meetup group, and look for practice. There's coaching circles that IC Agile supports. There's one for Europe, there's one for North America, there's one for Asia. And you go there for an hour and a half, and you actually practice on scenario based coaching. I think coaching is one of those things where you have to do it. I hate to say it this
It's
way.
not just the one of those things. I think many things are like that, but I would
Yeah.
say even further that coaching is one that you have to do on both sides of the coaching relationship. So
Oh,
definitely find a partner or a group where you can be the coachee and the coach, at different times, obviously, so that you get feedback and you learn and you practice. And there's even, I think, triad coaching, I think it's called, where you have three people, where one is the observer and provides feedback to both. I think Yves Hanul hosted a triad coaching session at the Scrum Masters Summit this year. So definitely, I think that's a great resource. Comparative Agility is on the chat, so you can just click there and go to the website and investigate this. Bob, we're getting to the end. Thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge. And before we go, where can people find you and the work that you're doing?
I think the best way to connect to me is I have a company website, R Galen, but and that's where I do my professional side. But the best way to reach me is on I have an alter ego called the Agile Moose. So if you search for Agile hyphen Moose, that's large animal moose, you will find me. And that there's resources about the book there. I actually have a landing some support pages for the book there, and some free resources like canvases. You can get some free canvases there. So the one place to find me is Bob Galen, and look for Agile Moose.
Absolutely. And we put the link just on the chat so people can go and check it out immediately. Thank you very much, Bob. It was a pleasure to have you here.
No, Vasco, it was a privilege to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the support. And everyone, thank you for hanging out with us. I really